Hi, hello, look at me, yet doing another episode. Welcome to Passive Pixels, a media catch-up podcast with another Edwin Castillo. Is it the same one as the last episode? Did I clone him and kill him and then take his place on his podcast? Perhaps. Do you have proof? No. Perfect, that worked great for me. Today is February 15th, which means that it is halfway a month. That means you guys are punished with another episode. Boo-hoo. So, currently, felt like I should mention it. I live in Houston, Texas. Houston is being hit by a huge winter storm, which really means just a couple of inches of snow. Some ice, too. I was able to make a snowman. That was interesting. We named him Jon Snow Castillo. He's a good man. I love the man he's becoming, and I look forward to seeing him grow up. The list for the first half of this month is a little threadbare, but I actually finished 2 whole games, which is actually the same amount that I've finished since the beginning of recording this podcast, so I would say pretty good numbers. The current list on the docket is Mad Men Season 2, Destruction All-Stars, Burn After Reading, Ori and the Blind Forest, Spec Ops The Line, Rick and Morty Season 1 and some of Season 2, Nier Gestalt, and a little announcement at the end. So, not gonna delay, gonna go ahead and go in the same order as always: movie, TV shows, and then games. Honestly, I'm shocked looking at this list that I only watched one movie, which was just recommended to me on a whim because I was seeking recommendations, which is Burn After Reading. I'm part of a Discord group. There's enough people who like Kino in there, so I decide to ask them, hey, I haven't watched that many Coen Brothers movies, so what could I watch besides their big 3, which I want to say is Big Lebowski, No Country for Old Men, and Fargo? What out of these 3 movies should I watch? It narrowed down to Burn After Reading and some other movie. However, because I'm a cheap bastard, Burn After Reading was free on Peacock, so I said, you know what? I will deal with Peacock. Fine, it's free. I'll deal with it. So, what is Burn After Reading? So, Burn After Reading is a movie about an ex-CIA agent who just got fired and is also in the middle of getting a divorce. His wife, at the behest of her lawyer representing her in the divorce, tells her that before she actually starts serving him papers to get divorced, should probably try and figure out what the finances of the house are, because after the process of getting a divorce might be a little bit difficult to get that information as accurately as before. She has a CD of all the information about the finances around the house, and she leaves it at a gym that she frequents. And from there, you have Frances McDormand and Brad Pitt being complete idiots that just don't really know what to do with their lives, find the CD and assume that all of their information for their finances to their house is actually top secret government information. There's extra stuff where everyone is cheating on each other. The wife is cheating on her husband, the FBI agent, with George Clooney. I think there's another person who's cheating, but I, for the life of me, can't remember because I'm just having a hard time remembering the details of this movie besides remembering that it was worth it. Moving past the synopsis, I very much enjoyed this movie. It gave me the right thing that I want in a comedy, which is, if you're going to ask me for 30 minutes, an hour 30, hour 45 of my life, make sure that your writing actually demands the time that you're asking for. I don't want to be able to watch a clip from your movie on YouTube and still get the joke as the same impact as it would be if I was watching it from the movie. It's kind of a bad thing, but I would say memes and the internet have kind of messed me up with my expectations for humor in movies. Also, I'd probably blame Marvel movies as well for killing what is a specific comedy genre, since most people would go, I laughed during Captain Marvel, I don't need a comedy anymore. At least going back to the memes thing, I'm kind of impatient when it comes to comedy movies now. Like I said, if someone can clip out a piece of your movie and put it up on YouTube and I gain the same enjoyment as if I were watching it in context, that might be a problem, because I could easily just go to Reddit and scroll through dank memes and be completely satisfied with the amount of laughs that I get from that instead of watching that movie. So I feel like I haven't really explained what it is about this movie that has comedy that works for me as compared to other things. For about the first half to 2/3 of the movie, I kept watching it and thinking, oh yeah, that's okay, that's a solid laugh. Oh, okay, that's a solid joke. But it isn't until the 3rd act hits that everything that they've been building up for the first 2 acts finally starts clicking in, and where the jokes are just nonstop. When your either TV show or movie, or hell, even game, If your humor is dependent on everything that comes before, it means that the investment that you've put in is worthwhile. One of the main shows that I can think of that does this is Curb Your Enthusiasm. As I was watching Burn After Reading, I kept thinking about Curb Your Enthusiasm and how they have the specific same writing. Maybe not the exact way that the jokes are told, but they have that process of, if you're going to be watching this entire time, you better have something pay off at the end for watching everything that came before. It does make me sad though, because watching this, the movie came out in 2008. I would say that there was a very good golden age of comedies that happened after The 40-Year-Old Virgin. I want to say in like 2005, where movies were becoming a little bit more clippable, where you can go back and watch the Dick's drawing from Superbad on YouTube and get your enjoyment like that. You can watch the Inside of You video from Forgetting Sarah Marshall. These are still funny, but these comedies kind of fell to the wayside because of memes as well as because of Marvel movies. Comedy movies don't make money anymore in theaters. And like I said, if people felt like they laughed when they watched Infinity War, then they may not be willing to go and watch Game Night instead. I'd also probably want to blame Netflix as well for devaluating comedies. Most people kind of think as comedies as, oh, look, it's a Netflix release. Oh, I'll probably catch it on streaming later on. I don't think this is me insulting Netflix. I think this is just me more of thinking of how people change their view on comedies. They just don't fill in seats anymore. But thankfully, Burn After Reading is one of those things that asks you for your time and says, we will reward you for spending our time, instead of you trying to go up on YouTube and looking up Burn After Reading best scenes. The good thing about writing like this is that whether you're watching Burn After Reading or Curb Your Enthusiasm, I can explain the punchline that is to those products. Ew, I just called them products. Ugh, moving on. The punchline to these medias. Medias? Is that plural? Is that singular? Fuck it. We're not caring about grammar right now. Medias. The good thing about these medias is that from the time that you put into it, they're going to pay you back. I could explain the punchline to these medias, but the problem is that you will think, oh, okay, I can see how that could be amusing, but you're not actually going to laugh. I could probably verbatim explain a scene from 40-Year-Old Virgin and you'll understand why it's funny, and that might not make you want to watch that movie. But Burn After Reading and Curb Your Enthusiasm have a writing style to them that if you watch everything that comes up before the punchline, suddenly that punchline is funny. Did I pull a sneaky on you and just talk about the landscape to comedies right now instead of talking about Burn After Reading? Yes, I did. So I'll circle back to talking about the movie itself. I'm just so reminded of how lucky we are to have Brad Pitt. This man has no faults to him until maybe he gets Me Too'd or something, and then I get to eat my words. But this man can do drama, he can do comedy, and he can do everything in between, and he completely nails it. In this movie, he plays the perfect, lovable idiot that you just really want to shake hard and just go, why are you so dumb? Please make smarter decisions. Frances McDormand is also great in this movie. She just plays someone who's just completely lost and it always wants to exude a confidence like she knows what she's doing. John Malkovich, I've just always appreciated from a distance, but being able to see him in a movie for what feels like the first time, listen, I will not talk about Bird Box because I think that's the only thing I can think of. You know what? Just in case, I will pause it and look it up on Wikipedia. Okay, scrolling through. This man has not stopped working at all. He was in a Transformers movie. Get your money. This man doesn't seem like he ever stops working. There we go. There's Bird Box. So disappointing. Do people love John Malkovich for Inside John Malkovich, or is there something I'm missing? Well, look at that. He was in Call of Duty Advanced Warfare as Oz. And it says in the notes, Exo Zombies. Huh, he produced The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Interesting. I felt like I had to scroll back up just because Inside John Malkovich didn't sound right. Being John Malkovich is the movie. Okay, I'm going to disappoint a lot of people by saying that I haven't watched that much that John Malkovich is in. But hey, at least he's good in Burn After Reading, so hey, that's a victory. Also, I'm going to try and forget that Bird Box ever existed. Yeah, basically between these three, they have just great comedic timing. Also, J.K. Simmons technically has a cameo role. I mean, I know that he's probably actually not credited as a cameo, but for the amount of time he has on screen, I count as a cameo. I enjoyed with the way it was shot that it was reminiscent of kind of those paranoia thrillers from the 60s and 70s. Kind of hard to dig in this one besides just saying it was funny. There were some good performances. Recommended. Next up, just because it feels like it's going to be a footnote more than anything else, let's go into TV, and we're going to start with Mad Men Season 2. So far, I mean, I am 5 episodes in. I don't hate it, but I do feel like it's losing a little of the luster that I really enjoyed from Season 1. Mad Men so far still feels like a hangout show. Here are the people who are working at Sterling and Cooper, watch them live their lives. They're all kind of messed up and they're trying to navigate life. That's completely fine. I wouldn't ask the show to change the way it's working, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like it's something that I'm tuning in often to get through as quickly as I can, as I did like season 1. Season 1 at least had the mystery of who Donald Draper was to string me along to keep watching. So far, season 2, the characters are good, but they're pretty much the only thing that's stringing me along to want to keep watching. I don't really know what the end goal of this is besides hanging out with these characters. I know that not every show needs to be like that, but it does help me with being able to get through it way quicker than I currently am. I've gotten through 5 episodes of season 2. The writing feels like it is just a step down, but I don't know how much of that is the focus of the show and where that's going. I am noticing a little bit of something lost from season 1, which is that I enjoyed in season 1 where it felt everything that was written on the page could have a double entendre, whether it meant an actual meaning to the characters who are speaking, or in just complete immature terms, is that I like it whenever they make jokes about stuff. So yeah, that's going to be the only real footnote about Mad Men. It's still beautifully shot. It's still acted very well. I just need to kind of focus on it and keep watching it. But for now, season 2 feels like a bit of a sophomore slump. I'm going to keep watching. I'm still going to get to the end of it. I don't hate it by any stretch of the imagination. So I'll get back to it. Next up on the list is Rick and Morty Season 1 and some of Season 2. I want to say it was a couple of years ago that I had made a deal with my brother-in-law that I would watch all of Rick and Morty in its entirety at that period of time that he would watch Season 1 of Game of Thrones. However, Season 4 of Rick and Morty hadn't been out yet, so by waiting for so long, I accidentally gave myself an extra season to watch. So sadly, Rick and Morty is going to be something that I keep coming back to. I say sadly, that should give you a hint of how I feel about it. Gonna make a controversial statement as someone who's in between millennials and zoomers and say I do not like Rick and Morty. However, I will say that there's been one episode that I really enjoyed, and that was Get Swifty. I'll talk about that later. So far, the only thing that I can get from Rick and Morty is that it feels like it's perfectly at home with Adult Swim. It feels like a much more nihilistic version of Futurama, and I prefer Futurama. There's something about Rick and Morty that's always off-putting. The fact that they kind of rely a lot on the ridiculous animations and the monsters that they have and just the way that they can twist and contort them. There's just something about that, like I said, this is another thing where the internet has kind of messed me up. I've watched way too much messed up shit that just pops up on my feed. I don't even go searching for it, but occasionally, just randomly, for some reason, I will find an ISIS video on Facebook because Facebook didn't care. Hey, do you want to see this woman get eaten by a Stairmaster? Congrats, Twitter has it for you. Hey, do you want to see this 360p video of a man's legs getting crushed by a leg press? Congrats, there's an entire Reddit page dedicated to it. I've just watched enough messed up stuff that watching some of these aliens melt and barf into each other and melt people into acid vats, it no longer phases me. So I'm not watching it out of a morbid curiosity like, oh man, look at how they do it. I'm just staring at it like I'm feeling really desensitized. It feels like part of the draw is seeing the ridiculous stuff that they can think of and imagine and how they twist and turn it, but I just don't feel like I care about it, and it feels like a lot of the humor is watch these aliens do weird stuff. Also, I don't understand what it is. I usually like nihilism. I enjoy very dark stuff, but something about Rick and Morty just feels like it doesn't even have fun with its nihilism. It feels like it's being nihilistic and it's not even happy about it. Like it regrets being this mean. Regret might not be the right word, but maybe it just doesn't have fun being mean-spirited. It's being mean-spirited to be mean-spirited instead of being mean-spirited because it's fun. It's kind of hard to draw a distinction there, but for example, South Park. South Park feels like it hates everything, but even when it's making fun of it, it still feels like it's having fun while burning that thing down. Rick and Morty will burn something down and then just be really angry while burning it instead of gleeful joy as it burns. I'm not gonna lie, I tried to give Rick and Morty a chance for the first 3 or 4 episodes, but since I'm locked in to watch the entire series, I did not mind having it in the background while I was doing other stuff. There were a couple of moments where I would tune in and pay attention, and they would have a solid joke where I go, okay, yeah, I guess that was fine. But once again, like I said, the internet messes me up with expectations. There would go episodes where I would glance over, look at it for a couple seconds, go stone face, and then go back to whatever I was doing. There were a couple of jokes that would make me go, yeah, that was clever. But it wasn't really until 1 episode in season 2 that I actually really started laughing, which was Get Swifty. Most of season 2, I mean, I've gotten 5 or 6 episodes into it. Whichever the episode after Get Swifty is, I think that's where I stopped. But it wasn't until Get Swifty that there was an actual full-on episode that I really enjoyed. And it's weird to say, but I think it was one of the less nihilistic ones. It enjoyed poking fun at what it was poking fun at. Basically, a gigantic lemonhead shows up and tells Earth, listen, I need a banger to listen to or I will assimilate you all right now. Rick and Morty create a banger about shitting on the floor, and the lemonhead goes, congrats, you actually won not your lives, you won a chance to show up in an intergalactic American Idol, basically. 5 planets, 5 songs, whoever has the best banger survives. Honestly, Ice-T and his entire backstory was just something that was so fascinating to me because they just kept building on Ice-T this entire episode. That was damn hilarious. The whole idea of Rick and Morty basically being a group and slowly falling out until they had to come together for the final show. I mean, that's just Dewey Cox, the Walk Hard story. I mean, that's great stuff. However, the standout story from this was the religion that started around the Lemonheads, all because they didn't know what Rick and Morty were doing. Every single time that they would cut away to the religion, it was easily the best part of the show, and it's what I enjoyed the most. It was just these characters completely misreading a situation, and all of it was character driven. Summer was completely living in fear of the Lemonheads. Jerry and Beth actually try to be good people and get punished for it in possibly the funniest way of death by balloons into the atmosphere. And everyone is also reacting to the Lemonheads, actually reacting to Rick and Morty's performance instead of thinking that the Lemonheads actually care about them, which, while yes, it is a little nihilistic to draw the parallel of God is not actually paying attention to you and the symbols that you think actually matter are just coincidences, yes, it's nihilistic, but the joke is funny enough that it masks that well enough. Consistently, it felt like this episode was escalating the humor into absolute absurd degrees. And of course, having Keith David as the president fits so perfectly because that man has such a commanding voice that when you hear him say whether to launch nukes or to not launch nukes, whatever that man needs, I will trust him to the end. Besides that, I mean, no, Rick and Morty doesn't really work for me. I need to finish whatever I finish because I'm itching to watch Game of Thrones again, and they're a great excuse to do that. Also a great excuse to buy a 4K of Game of Thrones, which I will do eventually. So yeah, Rick and Morty, a miss for me, but it's going to keep coming back here because I actually plan on making good on my 3 or 4 year deal now because I'm itching to watch Game of Thrones again. All right, now, credibility out the window, disgusting, get out of here, and games now. The first game that will get out of the way just because this feels like it's already been a negative episode, let's get it out of the way. Destruction All-Stars, a free PlayStation Plus game through PS5. Man, this game sucks. I played literally 1 match of it, and that was enough for me to say, I don't ever want to touch this again. From that same Discord that I was in, there was someone who was trying to gather enough people to play it together. Probably for a meme, maybe because he's serious. You really can't tell anymore on the internet. I played 1 match, the matchmaking was horrible, but I didn't even need other people to let me know that the game isn't good. I don't like the way the cars feel. They feel too arcadey. They don't feel tight enough. And of course, whenever you're out on foot, there's something about the character itself that just isn't really fun to play as. They feel too magnetic to the walls. And of course, anytime that you make me wall run, I'm going to compare you to the king of wall run, Titanfall 2. And if you are nowhere near that level, don't have wall running in your game. Oh wow, I went immediately into complaining and didn't even talk about what Destruction All-Stars is. Honestly, I have no idea what Destruction All-Stars is. I assume that there are cars. I assume that they crash into each other. I assume there's points associated to those cars whenever they crash into each other. But I couldn't tell you because it doesn't really seem like, from just jumping into the multiplayer, it doesn't seem like the game wants to explain it to you. Which, you know what, I'll take fault for that. I could have probably played the tutorial and understood it, but you would think that a game that's car crash car get points would be a little more straightforward instead of whatever the hell I played. I still can't believe that Sony was going to try and charge $70 for this game until someone made the smart choice of putting it as a PlayStation Plus game, because I can't imagine how much this game would have tanked at $70. I'm not saying anything new. I'm complaining about something that people have already complained about. There's no reason for me to keep belaboring this point. Next up, just because it's going to be another footnote, Nier Gestalt. This is the most recent topic. I just picked it up after beating the last two games that will be the two final topics because they are the meatiest ones. Basically, I just continued on my playthrough from the previous episode that I talked about it, still taking notes, still trying to make sure that I can get everything down so whenever I actually talk about Nier Gestalt, that I have all the info that's needed. So whenever I get Nier Replicant, which we're so close to, I want to be able to tell what the differences are so I can be authoritative whenever I talk about the difference between the two of them. So far, no real updates on that. I'm still playing it. I did a couple of side quests. One side quest involves a whole bunch of fishing, which was actually a solid one. I've played that fishing minigame so much now that I feel like even when I close my eyes, I can picture exactly how it works. Yet another footnote, Nier Gestalt, still going. Sorry, this episode just kind of seems like it's very bare bones, but that's mostly because there are two topics that are going to take up the bulk of this episode. The two games that I most recently beat are Ori and the Blind Forest and Spec Ops The Line. We'll start with Ori and the Blind Forest. Ori and the Blind Forest is an Xbox exclusive game, at least it was originally before it got ported over to Switch, which is how I played it. It is a Metroidvania, which, if you don't know what that is, think Guacamelee, think of course Metroid, think of course Castlevania, Hollow Knight. The defining factor of a Metroidvania is that you're kind of in this interconnected level. You have to find items to be able to progress through them, and these items or moves that you learn throughout the process of the game will help you either later on in the game being able to progress through it or traverse it, or even go back to those previous levels and catch items or secrets that you couldn't get before. It's pretty broad, but it's one of those terms that once you understand what a Metroidvania is, you can probably point it out very easily. Of course, Ori, Metroidvania. It is a hand-drawn, beautifully animated, majestically orchestrated, slightly focused on difficulty Metroidvania. There is a bit of a story. I played the game for about 10 hours. The story is there, the story is present, but it's not so much the focus, but that's only because I'm comparing it to actual games where they have a focus in the story. For a Metroidvania, this does have a story, and a pretty somber one. The opening hour has you basically as a forest spirit named Ori meeting your nondescript parent. I couldn't really tell if it was supposed to be a mom or a dad, but you and your nondescript parent basically just bonding for a little bit until something happens, which kicks off basically your entire game from there. You have a gigantic eagle that tries to chase you down, and there's even a solid story behind the eagle itself, which is crazy to think of because it's a Metroidvania. Most of the time, Metroidvanias are games that are all about challenging you instead of trying to give you an actual story. I feel like I need to break it down piece by piece just because I have varying opinions about the game itself. We'll go ahead and start with the audio-video portion of Ori. So we'll go ahead and start with the hand-drawn graphics and the music. The actual visuals of this game are very striking. They feel very picture book-esque. They have great use of color. I love the contrast that you have between Ori and the rest of the environment. However, if I did have one complaint about the visuals, is that a lot of times it felt like there was a lot of particle effects or sparkles where Ori himself is already a bright white character, and once you throw him within those sparkles, he can get lost pretty easily. The game has a very distinct art look to each environment that if you took a screenshot in all these different environments, you could probably easily tell, if you play the game, where you actually are in the map. The picture book art style works very good because it plays itself kind of like a children's book, maybe even like a bit of a grim tale, just because it is just a slightly dark story. It's not completely, mermaid eats your face dark, but it does have sort of a little bit of Disney sadness that we used to know them for. Bambi getting shot or Mufasa getting murdered. The kind of sadness that's safe for the whole family. Now, the music itself. The music is always going to be the thing that sets the tone. And right off the bat, this music is just such a huge focus in the game. This is one of the games that has a soundtrack that I'll be listening to for a good amount of time until I actually learn track names. The music itself fits the image very nicely. It is very emotional, it is very sweeping, and it wasn't until I was super hyper focused on the actual gameplay that I ended up not paying attention to the soundtrack. So the audio visual portion, I was completely fine with it. I enjoyed myself. It played a huge strength of why I'm positive about this game. But the gameplay is where I become a little split. The actual combat to Ori is a little mindless. You have a ground pound that you get at some point. You have a shooting thing that you can use. I assume it's like a little Tinkerbell that you just hold the button, and if you're in close enough proximity, it'll start shooting. However, whenever I was fighting enemies, it was just not the fun that I wanted to have in the game. There are these chase sequences where you have to redo them and basically do them perfect to be able to get through and progress. Those scenes in the game are what I feel a boss fight in an Ori game should be. It should be these gauntlets of testing you if you know the mechanics of this game, to be able to traverse through this treacherous area and being able to get to the end. There was at least one area, I think it's called Misty Woods or something along those lines, where I just really wanted to stop playing because it felt like it was more combat focused than it actually was traversal focused. One of my favorite things about a game that I kept mentally comparing this to was Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is another Metroidvania that it doesn't really give me reason to want to explore, but because the mechanics are just so fun and because that game is so punishing, I felt like I had to rise up to the challenge to actually enjoy Hollow Knight. Every single boss fight that I fought would usually challenge me and have to learn something new about the way that I was controlling my character. Ori, anytime that I came up to an enemy, I really just considered running past them because at some point, I already got all the traversal moves that I wanted. Hollow Knight had me working for the next traversal move so I can get around the map faster. Ori, while yes, I could kill these enemies and get XP that way, but I never felt compelled to keep going and fighting these enemies because I felt like my traversal was already augmented to a point where I wanted it to be. In Ori, I felt like I was more obligated to fight the enemies because I needed to level up, while in comparison, Hollow Knight, I went to go fight enemies because I wanted to be good enough for the bosses, and whenever I fought the bosses, I wanted to beat them not because of the upgrade they give me, but because beating the bosses was actually fun. They were kick your teeth in hard, but they were fun. Anytime that Ori would throw a whole bunch of enemies at me, what I would do is that I would just hold down a button and spam ground pound. That was probably my biggest problem when it came to Ori. I just kept comparing it to Hollow Knight, and under each measure, it kind of fell, except maybe about the story. Hollow Knight is from the school of Dark Souls storytelling, where you kind of have to piece it together yourself through the environments, and yes, that is how people enjoy their stories. It's not particularly how I enjoy them. I enjoy more of actual presentation done to it. I understand that the way that stories are told in Dark Souls is very good when it comes to video games. It's just not how I want to experience them. Maybe there will be a game that comes in and proves me wrong, where it's maybe a little more accessible than Dark Souls, but at the current time, it's not how I like to experience them. Ori is a bit more traditional with the way that it tells its story, so that's the only point I can ever think of. Yes, Ori has this over Hollow Knight. However, the one thing that both of them, it might become a toss-up on where I land, is that the control of Ori and the control of the Hollow Knight are just great for what they do. Ori's double jump and dash and wall run and climbing, all of that just feels so great to control. You never feel like you're out of control. If you mess up, you know that it was your fault and it wasn't the game's not exactly calculating how you control. The only thing I can complain about is that maybe Ori moves a little too fast. So sometimes, at least one spot that I can think of where there were some floating platforms that were really close together, Ori moves really quickly, so it felt harder to close the gap between the spot you're in and where you want to land because it was so close by. Ori is so quick that you kind of have to undershoot what you're already used to overshooting. But that was literally just one area that I had a problem with. The last section that I want to touch on is story, but I feel like I kind of disseminated it between the other topics. The story, very sad, very heartfelt. It feels picture book-esque. It has that Disney sadness to it. I enjoyed the story that was being told, but of course, I don't think it's something that I can dive deep into and like, oh, find why this is the true reason capitalism is the true evil. Look, it's Ori. It's a sad game. I don't really feel like I need to go too deep into that. Even though I feel like it sounds like it's been more negative than I want it to sound, I still really did enjoy Ori. For some reason, felt like I wasn't having enough patience for it. I felt like I was forcing myself to play it a little bit, but even with forcing myself, I know that this is a great game. I still think this might be the only Xbox produced game that I actually really care about. Gears, I don't really care about. Forza, I understand is good. I enjoy it enough, but it's racing. It's never going to be a game that I will choose to play. If it's around, I'll play it, but it's never something I'll seek out. Halo to me is literally just Halo 2, split screen, swords and shotties, lockout, team slayer. That's pretty much it. Or even just Slayer. I'll allow that much variation. So yeah, good job, Xbox. You finally have a game that I actually care about, and an IP that you're holding on to that I wouldn't say is strong enough to make me want to buy a console, but hey, at least it's a starting point. Maybe I'll buy it on PC. All right, so now we're going to talk about a game that I replayed that is easily one of my top favorite games of all time, Spec Ops The Line. Spec Ops The Line is a game that came out in 2012. It is developed by Jaeger and it was published by 2K. I don't even think Jaeger as a development studio exists anymore, so that leaves this game in a unique position where it is one of the few one and done games that gaming has. Yes, I know Spec Ops is a series and Spec Ops The Line was supposed to be a reboot, but by the sheer virtue of this game being super different from the rest of it, I'm just going to consider this as its own thing and not as part of that series. So, what is it that makes Spec Ops The Line a special game? The synopsis of it is that you are a hold on. I want to say Army. I want to say Marine. I want to say a whole bunch of different things, but I do not want to get them mixed up because I like Armed Force people way too much to do that to them. Okay, having it looked up, it seems that the characters were Delta Force, which is a special operations force of the United States Army. So they were Army men. You are in a squad of 3 people, Martin, Lugo, and Adams, and you are tasked with going into Dubai. There is a man named Joseph Conrad who is in charge of a unit for the army named the Dam 33rd. They were in Dubai. They were there to stop an insurgency. However, a sandstorm came in the middle of them trying to evacuate Dubai, were basically buried underneath the sand, with the last transmission being from General Conrad. I said general. Now, because I am a stickler for this, I do want to check and see if that's the right ranking. Oops, sorry. I guess we're going to be demoting General Conrad down to Colonel Conrad. I hope that's right because that's not one I'm looking up. A couple of months after the Dam 33rd had gone dark, there was another transmission from Colonel Conrad that was explaining the situation. The United States Army heard about this and then sent you, playing as Martin, and 2 people, Adams and Lugo, to go and investigate Dubai. You go in, you start noticing that there's a civil war going on between the locals and what is left of the Dam 33rd, and that is just the starting point for a game that on its surface feels like every other Call of Duty campaign, and on the surface feels like every other Battlefield campaign, but it is secretly harboring something deeper underneath the surface. I love this game. I was kind of scared because I thought this was going to be one of the games in my list that if I replayed it, I wouldn't hold it as in high regards, but I think even further on now, I appreciate it even more. Even as a PS3 game, and yes, I did play it on PS3, I played for the Platinum, even as a game that at this point is now 9 years old, I could still feel the love and craft that was put into this game. When they were making this game, 2K had said, hey, Jaeger, you guys need to use the Spec Ops name. You guys can make whatever game you want, but it needs to be branded Spec Ops. While I think the previous Spec Ops games were a bit more like SOCOM, this game, even if it was just wearing that name, I'm glad that they got that name just because I assume 2K, thinking that that's a brand name, decided, hey, it's a brand name, pour money into it. And I'm impressed at how well crafted this game is. So much of it feels like it had that budget that most games would kill to have. It felt like, even though, now it looks a little janky, it looks a little pixelated, all of the things that happen in the game, the set pieces, feel like they have some grand scale to it. The performance that Nolan North gives as Martin, Nolan North is a man who has played Nathan Drake and Desmond from Assassin's Creed, and both of them are basically played the exact same way. It's just that the writing is better in one and a little bit more emotion is put in one. And yet in this game, Nolan North is just playing Nolan North, who is just Nolan North. Except in this game, he is trying his damnedest to actually get the material to shine, and he does. And I can't help but be impressed that it's so weird because nowadays we have Troy Baker, and Troy Baker plays Troy Baker, who is just Troy Baker. But I don't think I've heard Troy Baker have a performance quite like either Booker or Joel, and he's usually sounding like different people. While in comparison, Nolan North is just playing himself, and he's selling the material so well that I don't think Nolan North, I think Captain Walker. When I originally played this game, I felt like I was already getting tired of military shooters. I had played a little bit of Modern Warfare at a cousin's house, and I enjoyed it. I bought Modern Warfare 2 day one and loved it and spent way too much time with it. I played Black Ops 1 and I didn't really enjoy it as much as Modern Warfare, and I dropped out once Modern Warfare 3 kind of hurt me a little bit when I realized that Modern Warfare 3 was just Modern Warfare 2 with worse maps and worse guns. Even the guns that they had moved over, I felt were worse in that game. After that, I thought, oh, maybe I'm not just a Call of Duty person. Maybe now I'm a Battlefield person. I played Battlefield 3, and that was finally the game that broke me, and I just realized I didn't care for military shooters. That's how the timeline goes in my head. I know that there was a gap between when I played Battlefield 3 to playing Spec Ops, but in my head they fit so perfectly in between just because it feels like the right progression of how I played these games. I played the brown military shooters, the oorah kind of game, and then finally Spec Ops The Line comes in and goes, yeah, but that's all bullshit. And something about that game just really struck a chord with me. I was kind of scared that since it felt like a very time and place thing that made that game work really well for me, that I thought that replaying it might have lost its magic, but no. I played this game initially with the intentions of platinuming it, as well as being able to re-experience the story and give my thoughts of how I felt about it now. Even playing the game on the hardest difficulty, which, by the way, I'll complain about that later. Let me gush first, and then I'll complain about that. Even while playing on the hardest difficulty, which is just really unfair sometimes, I still was enjoying the story because they still had some really good writing in this game. Even with me knowing the twist in the game, it felt nice knowing that the twist is nicely laid out. Not only that, I mean, just everything about the game is so designed around the story. For me, one of the biggest things is having a gameplay system that supports the story, and or the other way around, a story that supports the gameplay. Now, this is where I'm going to start getting negative because I'm going to bring up the elephant in the room, The Last of Us Part 2. Yeah, I found it very hard to think about Spec Ops without not thinking about what the problems are that I have with The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2, my biggest problem with it, besides the story itself, is that the gameplay itself doesn't feel like it supports the story. At this point, I think I'm gonna go into spoilers for both, so Probably you can just skip the rest of this episode because I don't think I'm coming back into spoilers. I'll put a timestamp if you want to hear like the special announcement at the end, but besides that, just assume spoilers from here on out. 3, 2, 1. Joel gets his head bashed in like a fucking melon. Okay, cool. We got that out of the way now. One of my biggest problems with The Last of Us Part 2 is that the game feels like it really wants to tell you, like, oh man, isn't this violence horrible? Oh man, you're a horrible person for doing this. But that's done as Ellie. However, once you get to controlling Abby, Abby herself is like, oh, well, you're just fighting Seraphites who, you know what, they're just bad people in general. They're transphobic. Kill them. It feels diametrically opposed to the whole idea of you're killing these people, you're horrible people, when both of them are on the opposite sides of a war where they're just killing each other. Ellie's killing shouldn't be good if Abby's is bad, or vice versa. Abby's killing shouldn't be good if Ellie's is bad. Maybe I said the same thing twice, whatever. But what I mean is that it doesn't feel like the killing should be justified either way. And one way that it also kind of breaks for me is that the gameplay within The Last of Us Part 2 is super damn fun. You don't understand how exciting it is to bash someone's head in with a bat, to see someone get knocked down and then you shotgun their head and you just see the viscera come out of it. The gameplay in The Last of Us Part 2 is really fun, and I feel like that's detrimental to the story because the story is trying to condemn the violence that you're taking part in. But I never feel guilty about it because I know I'm having fun. Now, let's compare that to Spec Ops, which is why I think that even if Spec Ops isn't exactly a well-playing game, I would prefer it as an experience over many other games. Spec Ops The Line is not the best controlling third-person shooter. I don't even think it's a good controlling third-person shooter. But what I do think it does is that it can give you the feel of what you're playing. In this game, you're supposed to feel uncomfortable about killing American soldiers. You're supposed to be uncomfortable with the choices that you make in this game. You are choosing in between shooting some soldiers or shooting people that are strung up that you have to decide your justice for. Your character has a teammate die, and you have a couple of choices there. You can melee the crowd in front of you and scare them off. You can take a couple of shots into the air. You can take a couple of shots into the ground. Either way you shoot will scare them, or you can just start blasting into the crowd. There's not a game over to actually do these decisions. You can kill these civilians, and even though, it feels like the emotional right thing to do, like you want to get revenge on them, the game doesn't feel like it ever passes judgment on you. It just goes, all right, that's the choice you made. Not only that, it feels like the actual gameplay itself is not fun. It's not fun. I don't ever feel like I'm fully in control. But while that would be a detriment for other games, the gameplay itself supports the story because the story is basically telling you this isn't supposed to be fun. One of my favorite things is that the loading screens around the end of the game get super passive aggressive. At some point, the game just starts loading in messages like, do you feel like a hero yet? What's another one? To kill for yourself is murder. To kill for your country is heroic. To kill for entertainment is harmless. And you're playing a video game. That last one is directly pointed towards you. The game is judging you for actually putting in your input, but there's something about that clicks in better for me for The Last of Us Part 2. Spec Ops The Line overtly judges you because it just knows that you were probably here for something else. I feel like The Last of Us Part 2 feels like, I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to tell why this is violence is all horrible. But the gameplay itself is so fun that you're like, well, that's the problem. This is a video game. I'm still having fun. Even if you're trying to tell me that this is all bad stuff, I'm still having fun. So if you're trying to make me feel bad about it, I disagree. Spec Ops The Line, I'm never having fun, but I'm still engaged. The story itself is still good enough that I want to keep playing to figure out what happens next. The gameplay rides this fine line of just not being in control, not being fun, but you're still engaged enough with what's going on screen that it's not really even toleration, but it's not enjoyment either. Because it's kinetic, you feel the gunshots, but you never feel that satisfaction of getting a kill. You just feel like you're slogging through it, but at the same time, I don't know how to explain it. It just feels like it's worth it. Just because I feel like I'm talking about both sides of my mouth by saying, oh, Spec Ops doesn't judge you, and also Spec Ops judges you hard, I feel like there's something that I need to be distinct about. The game doesn't judge you for most of the choices that you make, but the game does judge you for one really hard thing, which is the white phosphorus scene. The white phosphorus scene is okay. To talk about this, most people have played Call of Duty for Modern Warfare. There is a chapter where you're in AC-130 and you're shooting basically down on the ground. And the goodness of that mission is that you get that dehumanization of being so high up that you don't see people on the ground. You just see little specks that need to be snuffed out. That is a very good chapter of just showing you how the people on the ground are yelling at each other and they are fighting for their lives. But then you have the people in the AC-130 that are just kind of joking like, oh, yep, and there goes another, and that's another. Yep, and we found one. All right. Like, they sound so chill about something that on the ground floor is just taking people's lives. Modern Warfare 1, of course, being one of the few games that actually took itself seriously. Spec Ops has its own spin on this that feels even darker. You have an entire camp of people that you assume are soldiers. You see your reflection, well, Martin's reflection, in the Predator drone as he's shooting white phosphorus. And it isn't until you go on the ground floor that you realize that the white phosphorus is so destructive to these people. And not only the soldiers, you then find out that it was a refugee camp and you killed innocents. I can't tell you just how powerful that is. Most games, I will kill someone and not stop to think about it, which is why I spoke exactly about The Last of Us Part 2. Never for one single moment did I feel guilty about killing anyone in that game. Any single time that someone died, most of the time I was cheering, either because I had fun or because it was a character that died that I didn't care about. But in Spec Ops, these completely nameless NPCs that are crawling around without limbs and completely burned by the white phosphorus, that actually got me just because it feels actually impactful. The choices that you make in the game, kind of like the example that I gave, either between shooting soldiers or determining whether if the guy who stole water or the man who retaliated and killed that man's family, that's an actual situation in the game. The choices you make in the game aren't judged by the game, but your continued participants after the white phosphorus scene, where you are in the process of playing a video game for your entertainment. The game judges you for going, oh, you see, it's just a Predator drone mission. You've done these before. And the game judges you for just assuming that this was just going to be some standard thing that you've done in every other video game. That's where the judgment comes in. The fact that we can get into these routines where we don't even stop to think about the ramifications of what we're doing. The actual choices in game, no judgment. However, the very fact that you continue persisting on after even doing that is where the game judges you, and that's where the storyline gets very good. To piggyback off of this into another game that I find very special, Nier Automata. Yes, I know, I'm a parody of myself if I'm even talking about this again. But Nier Automata is a game all about cycles, and progressively with each cycle that you play through the game, the story gets worse and worse and worse for each of these characters, and the game judges you for that, for you being able to just continuously put these characters into these cycles and making their lives worse. And there's something about you being an active participant in doing that, in making things worse, is what I like. But in comparison, I'm actually doing the bad stuff, and I feel bad as I'm doing them in Spec Ops and Nier. The problem is that in The Last of Us Part 2, I never feel bad. Everything that I'm doing is fun. Everything that I'm doing feels like exactly what I want to do, at least until I start playing as Abby, and then the game just goes, oh yeah, you know that thing we've been telling you for the last 10 to 15 hours about you should feel bad about doing this? Yeah, fuck that, okay? You're going to be killing these cultish people that are backwards ass people. Kill them, who cares? I feel like that's not what I want. I want to be able to keep it consistent. Okay, so Spec Ops The Line. This is just a phenomenal game. We're probably never going to get another big budget game that takes as many chances as this did. It is a very subversive game that wears the skin of the games it's parodying while making fun of them at the end of it. It's such a phenomenal game. If you can play it on PC, play it on Xbox, absolutely worth it. If you have to dig out a PS3 and even play a copy there, I did that and I was still satisfied. I can't recommend this game enough. Now, that's at least the actual story portion, the whole discussion about that, the gameplay and all that. Now, let me talk about specifically another reason why I replayed it, which was to get the platinum. Of course, occasionally I will snap a little bit and start looking for trophies. Spec Ops The Line, I had gotten most of the trophies. There were a couple of like, oh, get it 75 kills with a shotgun. Oh, collect all the intel, the little collectibles in the levels. And those were some of the trophies I was missing, including trophies related to different choices and playing the game on the hardest difficulty. Man, that was not fun. Oh my god, that hardest difficulty was not fun. Most of the game, I was getting into the rhythm of popping up. Don't stay out for more than 3 to 4 seconds. You can kind of hide behind a corner and cheese it a little and pop headshots very easily. You can get your gun outside the corner, but they can't hit you. Pretty solid. But then eventually, it's funny. I played chapters 1 through 3 pretty easily over a night. It wasn't too bad. I then went through chapters 4 all the way to 12 in one night and was completely fine. I spent one entire night on chapters 13 and 14. This game is 15 chapters. The 15th chapter is just walking through and getting the story. 13 and 14 is when the game just completely goes, fuck you, you're not supposed to play this at all, get out of here. It's funny because the early parts of the game, you're shooting people, you got a couple of seconds to survive before you completely get blasted. Here, you're facing enemies that can all crossfire you at any moment. So if you come out and you even try to pull one shot may take a second or two. There's probably a 65% chance that you will die by popping out at the wrong moment. It is so annoying that I'm even shocked I stuck with it. I'm pretty sure if it wasn't sucking cost fallacy where I had knocked out all the other choice trophies by doing all the other choices that I did from the opposite of my original playthrough, had I not gotten all those trophies, I would not have stuck around with this trophy. This was not fun. However, it is really satisfying to be able to say that from these 7 games that I have, my 7 favorite games list, I have 5 platinums in them. Let me read them off just because part of me thinks I'm actually wrong about that. My 7 favorite games are Nier Automata, Journey, Metal Gear Solid 3, The Last of Us, Shadow of the Colossus, Spec Ops The Line, and Red Dead Redemption 2. Nier Automata, I have the platinum for. Journey, I 100%ed, but it does not have a platinum trophy on PS3. I have not completed it on PS4. Metal Gear Solid 3, I had the platinum both on PS3 and Vita. The Last of Us, I had the platinum on PS3 and PS4. Shadow of the Colossus, I don't know if I'll ever go for it. Spec Ops The Line, I have the platinum for. And Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm never going to get the platinum for. Out of the 7 games that I have 6 platinum trophies. 1 for Nier, 2 for Metal Gear Solid 3, 2 for The Last of Us, and 1 Spec Ops The Line. Journey is a 100%, but it doesn't have a platinum trophy, so it doesn't count. It's pretty solid if you ask me. Honestly, I just accepted that I was going to have to cheese my way through it. I was going to have to pull every dirty trick that I could, and I was shocked that even with how negative I was about trying to get the platinum, I still was able to enjoy the story. I was impressed with that. I could probably still replay that game, and I still will at some point. I have a copy on PC. I'd probably like to see what it looks like when it's running something above maybe 540p and maybe at something a bit stabler than 25 frames a second. All right, I want to say that that's probably the end of the episode. Special announcement time. I'm going to be doing a special episode in between this one and next week. It's all going to be focused about the first 3 episodes of The Leftovers. Complete spoiler warning, so between now and whenever this episode comes out, as well as the next one, just start The Leftovers. This is my entire way of trying to get people to start The Leftovers. The first 3 episodes of The Leftovers pair so nicely together as just one long movie, because even if you stop there, you would still get something pretty satisfying. Just watch The Leftovers, okay? I don't even want to say bye, just watch The Leftovers.